Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Naruto was the true heir of the Otsutsuki throne and made Eida his devoted princess. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, Blood of the Star. The forest was a graveyard of splinters and scorched earth. Massive trees, ancient before Konoha's founding, lay in ruin, their trunks snapped like twigs. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and churned soil, tasted of violence. At the epicenter of the devastation, Naruto Uzumaki gasped, his lungs burning. One arm was bent at an unnatural angle, and a deep gash ran from his brow to his cheek, leaking a steady stream of crimson that mingled with the dirt on his face. Across from him, Code grinned, a picture of manic confidence. The white karma seal snaked across his face, a dark brand against his pale skin. He was untouched, his pristine white coat a stark insult against the backdrop of destruction he had wrought. "Is that it, Hokage?" Code's voice was a sneer wrapped in silk. "I was told you were a god. A legend. But you're just a man. A tired, fading man." Naruto pushed himself to his feet, the Sage of Six Paths mode coating him in a shimmering orange aura. Truth-seeking orbs hovered behind him like miniature black suns, but their number was depleted. He had used several to block attacks aimed not at him, but at the retreating evacuation teams. Code was clever. He hadn't tried to overpower Naruto directly, he had used the Hokage's own protective instincts as a weapon. "You talk too much," Naruto grunted, spitting a bloody glob onto the ground. He formed a hand seal, and a raisin shuriken roared to life in his palm, its shriek tearing through the unnatural quiet of the forest. Code simply laughed, his feet already sinking into one of the black bands he'd painted across the battlefield. Too slow. He vanished. Naruto's senses, honed by years of war and god-level threats, screamed. He wasn't behind him. He wasn't above. The attack was coming from everywhere and nowhere. Dozens of black lines crisscrossed the clearing, a web of instantaneous travel. Suddenly, Code appeared directly in front of him, not from a band on the ground, but from one he had secretly clawed onto the back of Naruto's own tattered cloak during a previous exchange. The move was brilliant, audacious, and utterly unforeseen. Naruto's eyes widened, not in fear for himself, but in realization of the checkmate. Code's claws, unnaturally sharp and coated in his own malevolent chakra, weren't aimed at Naruto's head or heart. They were aimed lower, at his abdomen. But it wasn't an attack. It was a feint. As Naruto's body instinctively moved to block the perceived killing blow, Code's other hand, emerging from a different claw mark just to the right, shot forward like a piston. There was no time to erect a truth-seeking shield. No time for a substitution. The sharpened claws plunged through the back of Naruto's chest, piercing lung and tearing through vital organs before erupting from his front, dripping with his lifeblood. The raisin shuriken in Naruto's hand dissipated into nothing. The vibrant orange of his chakra cloak flickered and died, leaving him in his torn black and orange fatigues. He stared down at the claws protruding from his sternum, a look of profound surprise on his face. He'd been struck by Pain's rods, stabbed by Sasuke's Chidori, and nearly disintegrated by Kagaya's all-killing ash bones. This felt different. This felt final. Code leaned in close, his breath hot and rancid against Naruto's ear. "This is the price for meddling with the Otsutsuki," he whispered, twisting the claws for good measure. A wet, tearing sound echoed in the silence. A pathetic end for a false god. The pain was a white-hot supernova. It consumed everything. Naruto's vision tunneled. Kurama, a silent, fading presence since the battle with Ishiki, offered no roar of fury, no surge of healing chakra. There was nothing left to give. He was alone. The darkness at the edge of his sight began to creep inwards. And then, something shifted. It wasn't a surge of power. It was a deep, resonant hum. It started in his bones, in the very marrow, and spread outwards. The pain didn't vanish, it was simply observed. Catalogued. Deemed irrelevant. The stalled 80% of Momoshiki's karma, a poison he'd been fighting for years, suddenly slammed into a wall it couldn't breach. Not a seal, not a jutsu, but a genetic firewall that had been dormant for millennia. The latent blood of the Uzumaki, the life force of Azura, the remnants of the Sage of Six Paths, they were all just tributaries flowing into a vast, ancient ocean. Now, the ocean was stirring. The sky above the ruined forest, once a clear blue, abruptly bled into a deep, bruised violet. The birds stopped singing. The wind died. Gravity itself seemed to thicken, pressing down with a tangible, suffocating weight. Code felt it first. A sudden, inexplicable pressure that made his knees want to buckle. He tried to pull his claws out of Naruto's chest, but they were stuck, held fast by an unseen force. Panic, an emotion he hadn't felt in years, clawed at his throat. What is this?" he stammered, pulling harder. Naruto's head lifted. His eyes, once a vibrant cerulean blue, were now the color of a dying star, a cold, piercing silver. There was no rage in them. No pain. There was only a vast, empty stillness. He looked at Code, and for the first time, Code understood what it felt like to be an insect under a microscope. "You are loud," Naruto said. His voice was the same, yet utterly different. It held no inflection, no emotion, but every syllable carried the weight of a mountain. It was a voice that didn't ask for obedience, it simply was. A new wave of killing intent washed from Code, desperate and raw. He wrenched his arm back, finally tearing his claws free in a spray of blood, and lunged forward, aiming to decapitate the Hokage before this, whatever this was, could escalate. Naruto didn't move. He didn't raise a hand. He just watched the attack come. Code's claws, inches from his neck, stopped. They didn't hit a barrier. They just stopped moving, frozen in midair. Code's body was locked in place, every muscle screaming as he fought against an invisible, absolute authority. Then, he watched in horror as his own attack began to unravel. Not explode, not dissipate, but break down into its most fundamental components. The dark chakra fizzled into particles of light and shadow. The physical matter of his arm deconstructed into a shimmering dust that drifted away on a non-existent breeze. He wasn't being attacked. He was being unmade. "My turn," Naruto said, his voice a flat, calm declaration of fact. He raised a single finger. The air in front of him shimmered, distorting like a heat haze. A wave of pure, colorless, silent pressure expanded outwards. It wasn't chakra. It had no temperature, no scent. It was the pure, weaponized will of a being who sat at the apex of the cosmic hierarchy. The pressure wave hit Code. There was no explosion, no sound of impact. He was simply erased. His manic grin, his white coat, his karma seal, all of it was gone, reduced to a fine particulate matter that settled on the forest floor like a foul-smelling dew. The black claw marks he'd left across the landscape faded and vanished, as if they had never been. Naruto stood in the center of the clearing, the gaping wound in his chest knitting itself closed with terrifying speed. The skin stitched together, leaving no scar, no trace of the injury. He looked at his hand, flexing his fingers. The world felt clearer. Slower. The complex tapestry of life, energy, and matter was laid bare to his perception. He could see the flow of water in the deep aquifers below, hear the frantic heartbeat of a rabbit miles away, feel the subtle gravitational pull of the moon. He looked at the spot where Code had been, his silver eyes holding a flicker of something clinical and detached. A problem had been solved. An annoyance removed. He turned and began the long walk back to Konoha. The violet sky slowly faded back to blue, but the world had been irrevocably changed. The Jonin stationed at Konoha's main gate were on high alert. The report from the front line had been a garbled mess of panic and confusion before cutting out entirely. All they knew was that the Hokage was engaging code, and the output of destructive energy had been astronomical. One of them, a veteran named Kosuke, saw a lone figure approaching on the road. The silhouette was unmistakable. "It's the Hokage-sama," he called out, relief washing over him. "He's back." His partner, a younger shinobi, raised a hand to wave, but the gesture froze halfway. As Naruto drew closer, a palpable chill began to bleed into the warm afternoon air. It wasn't the killing intent of an enemy, it was something far more unnerving. It was the pressure of a hurricane contained in a human form, the silent, immense weight of a deep-sea trench. Kosuke felt it too. The hairs on his arms stood on end. His breath hitched, and a primal, instinctual part of his brain screamed at him to drop to his knees. It was the feeling a field mouse gets when a hawk's shadow passes over it. Naruto walked past them without a word. His gait was different. There was no wasted motion, no hint of his usual boisterous energy. He moved with a liquid, predatory grace that was utterly alien. When his gaze swept over them, it wasn't a glance of acknowledgement. It was a scan. They felt utterly transparent, their chakra levels, their heart rates, their fleeting thoughts of fear laid bare. He passed through the gate, and the oppressive feeling lessened, leaving the two shinobi gasping as if they had been holding their breath underwater. "Kami-sama," the younger one whispered, a hand pressed to his chest. What was that?" Kosuke swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I don't know. But that wasn't just the Hokage." Naruto's path through the village was a silent procession. Villagers who had been ready to cheer his return stopped dead, their smiles faltering on their faces. Children who idolized him instinctively hid behind their parents' legs. They saw the familiar orange and black, the spiky blonde hair, but they felt a stranger, a being of immense and terrible power walking in their leader's skin. The air around him was a pocket of absolute silence in the bustling village. He reached the Hokage tower and ascended the stairs, his footsteps making no sound. He didn't need to knock. The door to his office swung open before him. Shikamaru Nara was inside, pacing frantically, a cloud of cigarette smoke hanging around his head. He looked up, relief flashing in his eyes, but it was immediately replaced by a sharp, analytical frown. "Naruto. What the hell happened?" "The reports," he stopped mid-sentence. He saw the change instantly. It wasn't just the new, unnerving stillness. Naruto's eyes, back to their normal blue now, seemed deeper, older. The faint whisker marks on his cheeks seemed less like birthmarks and more like brands of royalty. He carried himself not like a leader elected by his people, but like a king who owned the very ground he stood on. "The situation with Code is resolved," Naruto said, his voice calm and even. He walked past Shikamaru and stood before the large window overlooking the village. "He will no longer be a threat." Shikamaru's brilliant mind raced, trying to parse the information. The phrasing was odd. Not, "I defeated him" or "we drove him back." It was a statement of absolute finality. "Resolved? You mean, he's dead?" Shikamaru asked, taking a hesitant step forward. "Are you alright? Your chakra. I can't feel it. It's like you're not even there." "I'm fine," Naruto replied, his back still to him. "Better, actually." He raised a hand and pressed his palm against the reinforced glass of the window. "I can see it all so clearly now, Shikamaru. The flaws in our defense grid. The stress fractures in the outer wall from the last attack. The chakra signature of a spy in the marketplace, trying to blend in. It's all, so simple." Shikamaru's blood ran cold. The spy was a deep-cover agent from the land of iron they had been trying to track for months. For Naruto to pinpoint him with a casual glance from his office was impossible. "Naruto, what happened to you out there?" Shikamaru's voice was barely a whisper. This was beyond a new jutsu or a power-up. This was a fundamental change. Naruto turned from the window. He looked at the cluttered desk, piles of paperwork, a half-eaten cup of instant ramen, a framed picture of his family. He picked up a solid steel kunai used as a paperweight, his fingers closing around it gently. With a soft, metallic groan, the kunai crumpled in his hand like wet clay. He hadn't flexed a muscle. He hadn't infused it with chakra. The object had simply yielded to his will. He opened his hand and let the mangled lump of metal fall to the desk with a dull thud. "The limits I thought I had," Naruto said, his gaze meeting Shikamaru's, "they were self-imposed. The universe is governed by laws, Shikamaru. I'm just starting to realize I was never meant to follow them." Before Shikamaru could respond, before he could even begin to formulate a theory for this terrifying new development, the two of them felt it. A subtle ripple in space, a distortion just outside the office door. Two new chakra signatures, both potent and laced with the familiar, sickening taint of Otsutsuki technology, had just appeared inside the tower. In a dark alleyway in Konoha's commercial district, space twisted and tore open, leaving behind two figures. Eida, her beauty so perfect it was a weapon in itself, smoothed down her dress, a bored expression on her face. Behind her, the diminutive demon kicked at a loose stone, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "Well, this is a dump," demon grumbled. "Hush," Eida said, her eyes closed. Her Senrigan, the all-seeing eye, was the reason they were here. Moments ago, from their hideout hundreds of miles away, she had witnessed the impossible. She had been observing the battle between Naruto and Code, a trivial little drama to pass the time. Then, for a split second, reality itself had broken. Her Senrigan, which could see everything in the present and all that had ever happened, had encountered a blind spot. A single moment in time, centered on Naruto Uzumaki, that was a complete and total void. Then came the energy surge, a wave of power so profound and alien it didn't even register as chakra. It was a mystery, and Eida hated mysteries she couldn't solve. More than that, it was an anomaly connected to the one thing that truly interested her, the Otsutsuki. As they stepped out of the alley, the effect was immediate. A man carrying a crate of vegetables stumbled, his eyes going wide with adoration as he looked at Eida. He dropped the crate, scattering its contents across the street, and simply stared, a foolish grin on his face. A group of women giggling amongst themselves fell silent, their gazes locking onto her with a mixture of awe and envy. Her power, the subconscious manifestation of Shirbai Otsutsuki's omnipotence, was absolute. It rewrote the minds of all who saw her, captivating them, making them slaves to her charm. All except blood relatives and true Otsutsuki. "Pathetic," demon scoffed, stepping over a spilled tomato. Eida ignored him, her focus on the Hokage tower. The energy signature had stabilized there. "He's in his office. Let's go." Their walk to the tower was effortless. ANBU guards materialized from the shadows, their blades drawn, only to freeze in place, their killing intent dissolving into doe-eyed infatuation. They simply stepped aside, clearing a path for her as if she were a visiting queen. Demon sighed, clearly bored by the lack of resistance. "Can I just kill one? Please?" "No," Eida said flatly. "We are here to observe." They reached the Hokage's office. Two of Naruto's personal guards stood by the door, their expressions grim. The moment they saw Eida, their faces went slack. One of them actually sighed dreamily and moved to open the door for her. Eida took a deep breath, preparing herself. She would walk in, and the legendary Naruto Uzumaki, the hero of the world, would become just another one of her puppets. It was inevitable. It was how the world worked. The door swung open. Naruto was standing there, next to a dark-haired man who was frozen in a state of shock. He wasn't looking at the door, he was looking directly at her. Eida felt the familiar, potent wave of her charm wash out from her, a psychic tsunami designed to enslave hearts and minds. It was an invisible, irresistible force that had never, ever failed. It hit Naruto and broke against him like water against a cliff. There was no resistance. No struggle. It simply vanished. His blue eyes, cold and clear as glacial ice, did not fill with love or adoration. They held no warmth. No recognition of her beauty. They held only a calm, unnerving, and deeply intelligent curiosity. He looked at her not as a man looks at a woman, but as a scientist looks at a fascinating, and potentially dangerous, new specimen. Eida's heart, for the first time in her conscious memory, skipped a beat. A cold dread, so foreign it was almost exhilarating, washed over her. Her power wasn't just her weapon, it was her shield. It was her identity. And he had looked right through it as if it were nothing more than a pane of cheap glass. He was seeing her, the lonely, modified girl beneath the layers of divine power. And he was not impressed. Demon sensed the shift instantly. The air crackled around him as his own power flared, ready to reflect any hostile intent. Eida? What's wrong? Naruto's gaze flickered from her to the boy beside her, his analysis just as swift, just as clinical. Then his eyes returned to hers. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy with unspoken power. Shikamaru was paralyzed, watching a confrontation that operated on a level he couldn't comprehend. Finally, Naruto spoke. His voice was quiet, yet it filled the room, pressing down on them all. It was not a request. It was not an order. It was a reconfiguration of reality. Sit. The word hung in the air. Eida's body moved before her mind could even process the command. Her legs, seemingly of their own accord, carried her to one of the visitors' chairs in front of the Hokage's desk, and she sat down with a grace she did not feel. She was not compelled by a jutsu. She was compelled by a deep, primal understanding of hierarchy. She had just met a higher predator. Demon bristled, his hand glowing. Hey! You can't order my sister around. Eida's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. Demon, no. Stop. Her voice was tight with a mixture of fear and something else, a thrilling, terrifying awe. Naruto ignored Demon completely. His attention remained on Eida. He broke their gaze and walked calmly to his desk, sitting down in his own chair. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers, the picture of a king holding court. You're Eida, he stated, his voice flat. It wasn't a question. A cyborg, heavily modified with the genetic material of Shirbai Otsutsuki. Your primary ability, colloquially known as charm, is a low-level form of omnipotence, projecting a desire-based reality-altering suggestion upon those who perceive you. It's effective, but unfocused. The boy is Demon. Your biological brother and designated guard. His ability reflects and amplifies killing intent back at its source. A simple but effective deterrent. Eida and Demon stared, stunned into silence. He hadn't just resisted her power, he had dissected it, named its parts, and evaluated its effectiveness in the span of a few seconds. No one, not even Amato who had created them, had ever described their abilities with such cold, effortless precision. Shikamaru finally found his voice, a strained whisper. Naruto, how do you know that? Naruto didn't look at him. His silver blue eyes were still locked on Eida. Because I can see it. The way her power flows. The way his is coiled, waiting. It's all just machinery. Suddenly, the room plunged into twilight. A deep, unnatural darkness fell over the entire village, stealing the afternoon sun. Outside the window, the sky was no longer blue. It was the color of a starless void. A collective gasp rose from the village below. And then, projected onto the canvas of the darkened sky, a colossal image began to form. It was not a face, but a symbol, 3 interlocking rings of pale, shimmering light, rotating slowly around a perfect circle of absolute blackness. It was a sigil of immense antiquity and unimaginable power. A voice echoed, not through the air, but directly inside their minds. It was ancient, cold, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of cosmic law. Plus the progenitor blood has awakened in a tainted vessel, The mental broadcast washed over every living being in Konoha, a wave of pure, psychic pressure that forced many to their knees. The celestial balance is broken. The ancient law is violated. In the office, Eida stared out the window, her body trembling. Demon stood frozen, his bravado gone, replaced by a raw, animal fear. Shikamaru clutched his head, the sheer alien nature of the mental intrusion overwhelming him. The Eternum Curia has rendered its verdict. Naruto alone seemed unaffected. He leaned back in his chair, his expression unchanged, and looked up at the impossible symbol dominating the sky. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't even surprised. He looked annoyed. Like a king observing a noisy herald who had dared to interrupt his court. This world, this system, this aberration, will be sterilized. The order will be restored. The symbol blazed with a final, blinding intensity, and then vanished. The sky snapped back to its normal blue, the sun reappearing as if nothing had happened. But the psychic echo of the voice remained, a scar on the minds of everyone in the village. Silence. Eida slowly turned her head from the window, her wide, fearful eyes landing on the man sitting behind the desk. He was no longer just Naruto Uzumaki, the Hokage. He was the tainted vessel. The aberration. He was the epicenter of a war that would be waged on a scale she could barely comprehend. He was the reason the gods were coming. And as he met her gaze, a single, chilling thought solidified in her mind: the gods were afraid of him. Chapter 2, The Unseen Strings. The Uzumaki household was an island of jarring normalcy in Eida's new, surreal existence. She sat cross-legged on a plush sofa in the living room, a stark contrast to the simple, lived-in clutter of the home. There were children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, a jumble of mismatched mugs on the counter, and a faint, lingering scent of miso soup and laundry detergent. It was so aggressively, profoundly ordinary that it felt more alien to her than any of Amado's sterile laboratories. For 3 days, she had been a guest, a prisoner, an asset in waiting. Naruto had installed her and Demon in his own home, a move that had sent shockwaves of confusion through Konoha's high command. The logic, as he'd explained it to a pale-faced Shikamaru, was brutally simple: the most valuable pieces are kept closest to the king. Demon was currently trying to balance a spoon on his nose, his boredom a palpable force in the room. "This is stupid," he announced for the 10th time that hour. "We should be out there, finding those floating ring guys and showing them what's what." "And what would you do?" Eida asked, not looking up from the blank television screen in front of her. "Reflect their scary thoughts back at them until they die of a headache?" "It would work," he insisted, the spoon clattering to the floor. Eida sighed. She was not bored. For the first time, the constant, cloying hum of adoration that had been the soundtrack to her life was gone. Here, in this house, under Naruto's silent, watchful authority, her charm was nullified. The silence was a balm. It allowed her to think, to feel the sharp edges of her own personality without the suffocating cushion of others' worship. It was terrifying, and she had never felt more alive. Her task, given to her that morning, was to use her Senrigan to monitor global communications and energy signatures. Naruto hadn't asked her, he had placed a tablet in front of her and said, "Report any anomalies." He was treating her like a highly advanced sensory device, and to her own shock, she didn't mind. It was a purpose, a function beyond being desired. The front door opened, and Naruto stepped inside. The atmosphere in the room immediately shifted, the air growing heavier, charged with his presence. He had shed the tattered remains of his battle gear for a simple black shirt and pants, but it did nothing to diminish the aura of absolute command that clung to him. He didn't walk into a room, he occupied it. His gaze swept over them, a quick, efficient scan. "Anything?" Eida shook her head. "The psychic residue from the Curia's broadcast is causing widespread panic, but there are no new energy spikes. All military channels are saturated with the leaders of the 5 great nations trying to contact you." "They're about to," he said, heading toward the small office off the living room. The Kage summit begins in 5 minutes. Demon snorted. Are you gonna let those old fossils tell you what to do? Naruto paused at the doorway, looking back at them. A flicker of something ancient and dangerous passed through his eyes. No, he said, his voice a low rumble. I'm going to tell them what will be done. He disappeared into the office, closing the door behind him. Eida's Senrigan didn't need a screen. She closed her eyes and focused her consciousness on the room he had just entered. She saw it all as clearly as if she were there, a secure chamber, hastily prepared, with a large central monitor. On the screen, 4 other faces stared out, each a pillar of the shinobi world. Gaara, the Kazekage, his expression typically stoic, but with a new tightness around his eyes. Darui, the Raikage, his arms crossed, his laid-back demeanor replaced by a grim tension. Chojuro, the Mizukage, looking nervous and out of his depth. And Kuratsuchi, the Tsuchikage, her face a mask of impatient fury. He's late, Kuratsuchi snapped. A galactic death sentence is issued on our world because of him, and he makes us wait. Patience, Tsuchikage, Gaara's calm voice soothed. Naruto is carrying a burden we cannot imagine. He is the burden, she shot back. That thing in the sky, the Furia, they named him. This is his mess. Just then, Naruto's face appeared on the main screen. He wasn't sitting in the Hokage's chair. He was standing, his presence dominating the frame even through the video link. The other Kage fell silent. I'm here, he stated, his voice cutting through the tension. Let's not waste time with pleasantries. You all heard the message. The Eternum Curia has passed judgment. They view me as an aberration and this planet as contaminated. They intend to sterilize the system. Darui leaned forward. So what's the plan, Naruto? Do we offer a tribute? Open negotiations? We can't fight something that can project its voice into our minds from across the galaxy. Naruto's expression remained flat. You are thinking like village leaders. You are trying to de-escalate a territorial dispute. This is not a negotiation. The Curia are not politicians. They are a force of cosmic law. They don't want tribute, they want erasure. They are coming to burn this world down to the bedrock and salt the ashes. Arguing with them is like a mouse trying to reason with a forest fire. The blunt, cold finality of his words hung in the air. Chojuro swallowed hard. Then, what can we do? The old ways are finished, Naruto said. The Shinobi Alliance, the treaties, the councils, they are too slow, too fractured. This enemy will not wait for us to debate strategy. From this moment on, there is a new chain of command. Kuratsuchi's eyes narrowed to slits. And I suppose you're at the top of it? You're not the supreme leader of the world, Naruto. You're one of 5 Kage. No, Naruto corrected her, his voice dropping slightly, yet gaining immeasurable weight. I am the reason the fire is coming. That makes me the only one who can stand in its way. Your villages, your armies, your jutsu, they are meaningless against this threat. You saw what I did to Code. He was an appetizer. The Curia commands forces that could unmake this planet before you could even finish weaving a hand sign. He paused, letting the terrifying truth sink in. Your options are this: you fall in line behind the one being they fear, the aberration they are coming to destroy. You consolidate all military and sensory assets under my direct command. Or, you can stand alone and face them with your pride and your traditions. Choose. Silence. Kuratsuchi's face was flush with anger, but she said nothing. She knew he was right. The sheer, existential dread of the Curia's message had made a mockery of their power. Gaara was the first to speak, his voice resonating with grim acceptance. Suna has always stood with you, Naruto. My shinobi are at your disposal. Darui let out a long sigh, running a hand over his head. A single, lightning-fast command structure. It's tactically sound, if nothing else. The cloud is with you. Chojuro nodded eagerly, relieved to have a clear path forward. The mist as well, Hokage-sama. All eyes turned to Kuratsuchi. She stared at Naruto's unblinking face on the screen, her jaw tight. Finally, she gave a short, sharp nod. Fine. But if you lead us to ruin, I'll be the first to take your head. Fair enough, Naruto said, without a hint of emotion. Send your best sensory and tactical officers to Konoha within the day. They will report to Shikamaru Nara, who will act as my proxy. That is all. The screens blinked out, leaving Naruto alone. Eida, watching through her senrigan, felt a shiver run down her spine. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't threatened. He had simply laid out the truth with the cold, irrefutable logic of a god stating the laws of physics. He hadn't asked for power, he had assumed it, and the most powerful leaders in the world had yielded because they had no other choice. Later that evening, the oppressive tension of the day had given way to a quiet stillness. Naruto was in the small garden behind his house, a training ground where he'd taught Boruto the Rasengan. The air was cool, and the moon cast long shadows across the neatly trimmed grass. Eida found him there, standing perfectly still, his eyes closed. She had felt a strange pull to seek him out, an instinct she didn't understand. You've alienated them, she said, her voice soft in the darkness. She stood several feet away, unsure of the protocol. They will obey you out of fear, not loyalty. Fear is a more reliable motivator than loyalty when extinction is on the table, he replied, not opening his eyes. Loyalty can be tested. Fear of annihilation is absolute. Is that what you believe? She asked, genuinely curious. You, the man who preached about the power of bonds and understanding? He finally opened his eyes, the blue seeming to drink in the moonlight. That man was the leader of a village. I am now the warden of a planet. The scale is different. The rules are different. He fell silent, his gaze shifting to a point just over her shoulder. His body didn't tense, but a subtle shift in his posture indicated he was now hyper-aware of his surroundings. Eida felt it too, a faint whisper of displaced air. They're here, he said simply. Suddenly, the night erupted. From the shadows of the garden wall, a dozen figures clad in stark white, featureless masks and black bodysuits exploded into action. They were silent, their movements economical and deadly. Umbu. But their insignia was wrong, a stylized root, long since disbanded. Or so it was thought. A volley of poison senbon, thin and black as a spider's thread, shot toward Naruto's neck from 3 directions simultaneously. Aida's breath caught in her throat. Before she could even think to move, Naruto acted. He didn't dodge. He didn't use a substitution. He simply raised his left hand, his fingers moving in a blur. When his hand stopped, he was holding the 3 needles perfectly between his index and middle fingers, their tips a hair's breadth from his skin. He looked down at them with mild disinterest, then his gaze swept over the assassins surrounding them. Ex-root, he identified, his voice calm. Zealots who believe any alien influence, including my own, is a corruption that must be purged. A predictable, if tiresome, complication. The leader of the squad, seeing the failure of the surprise attack, drew a ninjato and lunged, his blade glowing with a chakra-disrupting current. He was impossibly fast, a blur of motion aimed at Naruto's heart. Naruto didn't even turn his full body. He simply sidestepped, the blade hissing past his chest, and caught the assassin's wrist in a grip of iron. There was a sickening crunch of bone. The man didn't even have time to scream before Naruto's other hand chopped down on the back of his neck. He dropped like a stone, unconscious. The remaining 11 assassins paused for a fraction of a second, their fanatical resolve faltering in the face of such casual dominance. That was the opening Eida needed. A fierce, possessive instinct flared within her. These insects were trying to harm him. The being who saw her, the one she was finally beginning to understand. It was more than a chance to prove her utility. It was a chance to protect something uniquely valuable. My turn, she whispered, a predatory smile gracing her lips for the first time in days. She moved. Her taijutsu, honed by Amato's simulations and her own cruel whims, was a whirlwind of lethal grace. She flowed between the assassins like a deadly dancer. A high kick, more theatrical than necessary, snapped one man's neck with an audible crack. She spun, her legs sweeping out, and took two more down at the knees before dispatching them with precise, vicious chops to the throat. She was fast, impossibly fast. She reveled in a flicker of shock in their masked eyes just before they died. She dodged a kunai, not by moving out of the way, but by leaning back in an almost impossibly flexible arc, letting it graze her cheek before her hand shot out and plunged into the attacker's chest. It was over in less than 10 seconds. 11 bodies lay broken on the grass. Eida stood in the middle of them, breathing a little heavily, a single drop of blood trailing from the cut on her cheek. She felt a rush of adrenaline, a thrill of victory. She had been magnificent. Deadly. She had protected him. She turned to Naruto, a triumphant look in her eyes, expecting praise, or at the very least, acknowledgement. He was looking at the carnage, his expression utterly flat. Wasteful, he said. The word hit her like a physical blow. Her triumphant smile vanished. What? I took out 11 elite assassins in 10 seconds. I saved you. I did not require saving, he stated, his voice cold and analytical. He gestured to the body at her feet. You used a 5-move combination to disable an opponent who was already off balance. Your spin exposed your back for 0.8 seconds. The kick was unnecessarily high, sacrificing stability for aesthetics. Your goal was not victory. It was a performance. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, piercing her pride. He wasn't being cruel, he was being honest, and that was so much worse. You have the physical capabilities of a Hokage-level combatant, he continued, taking a step toward her. Your reaction time is augmented. Your muscle density is enhanced. But you fight like a spoiled child trying to impress her parents. Your potential is immense. Do not squander it on theatrics. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping the blood from her cheek. His touch was light, clinical, yet it sent a jolt through her entire system. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was the way one would clean a prized, but flawed, weapon. Attack me, he ordered. She blinked. What? Attack me, he repeated, his stance not changing. Use your full speed. Try to kill me. A flicker of anger ignited in her chest. Wasteful. Theatrical. She would show him. She lunged, her movements a blur, channeling all her frustration into a single, lightning-fast knife-hand strike aimed at his throat. He moved. He didn't dodge or block in the traditional sense. His body seemed to flow around her attack, his hand coming up to gently redirect her arm, using her own momentum against her. She stumbled forward, off balance. She spun, aiming a kick at his head. He ducked under it with inches to spare, his hand grabbing her ankle. With a simple, effortless twist, he upended her. She flipped in mid-air, landing silently on her feet, and came at him again, a furious barrage of kicks and punches. It was like fighting a ghost. He was always just outside her reach, his movements minimal, precise, and devastatingly effective. He parried a punch not by blocking it, but by tapping her elbow at the perfect moment, causing her arm to go numb. He avoided a sweep by lifting his foot a mere inch off the ground. He was teaching her. In the midst of her furious assault, he was breaking down her movements, showing her the flaws, the wasted energy. Finally, she overextended, lunging with a desperate tackle. He pivoted, letting her momentum carry her past him, and in a single fluid motion, he had her from behind, one arm locked around her throat, the other pinning her arms. She was trapped, held fast in a grip that was as inescapable as it was controlled. He wasn't even straining. She struggled for a moment, her heart hammering against her ribs, before going still. She could feel the steady, calm rhythm of his breathing against her back. He was a mountain. An immovable object. Efficiency, he said, his voice a low murmur in her ear. That is true power. Not the force of the attack, but the flawless application of it. You will learn this. He held her there for a second longer, letting the lesson sink into her bones. Then he released her. She stumbled forward, catching her breath, her cheeks flushed. She was humiliated, furious, and captivated. He hadn't been fighting her. He had been instructing her. He saw past the charm, past the deadly cyborg, and saw the untapped potential within. It was at that moment that a third person cleared his throat from the edge of the garden. Apologies for the interruption, Hokage-sama. It seems I've arrived at an interesting time. They both turned. Amato stood there, his glasses perched on his nose, a data pad clutched in his hand. He looked from the bodies on the ground to the flushed, panting Eida, and then to Naruto, his expression a mixture of morbid curiosity and profound fear. I came as soon as I decrypted the last of the data from Kara's archives, Amato said, his voice trembling slightly. It concerns the nature of the Otsutsuki and what you are becoming. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Speak. Amato swallowed, taking a deep breath. The Otsutsuki are not just a clan. They are a universal system of ascension. At the top, there was a being they called their god, Shirbai. He achieved true godhood and abandoned his physical form, leaving behind a power vacuum. An empty throne. He tapped his data pad. This throne is not a physical object. It's a position of absolute authority over the fundamental laws of the universe. The one who sits on it can literally rewrite reality. The Curia are not kings, they are the throne's lawkeepers, its guardians. Their purpose is to maintain stability until a worthy successor emerges. Amato looked directly at Naruto, his eyes wide with a terrifying understanding. The Otsutsuki king is chosen by blood. It requires a direct lineage to the Otsutsuki progenitor, the first of their kind. Kagaya, Ishiki, Momoshiki, they were all of a lesser branch. But your blood, the Uzumaki clan's unique vitality and life force, it wasn't just a random mutation. It's a heavily diluted, dormant remnant of the progenitor line. When Momoshiki's karma tried to overwrite you, it acted as a key, unlocking what was already there. You don't just have Otsutsuki power, Lord Hokage. You possess the genetic key to the throne. Eida stared at Naruto, her mind reeling. The heir. The true heir. It all clicked into place. His immunity to her charm, his innate authority, his terrifying new power. The Curia's mandate is to prevent cosmic instability, Amato finished, his voice dropping to a whisper. An empty throne is unstable. A human mongrel, as they called you, awakening the key without claiming the throne is the ultimate heresy. It's a threat to their entire cosmic order. If you don't claim it, and soon, their procedural directive is simple. Sterilize the anomaly at its source. Erase this entire solar system to prevent the corruption from spreading. Silence descended upon the garden, broken only by the chirping of crickets. The weight of Amato's words was suffocating. It was an ultimatum on a cosmic scale. Become a god, or see your world annihilated. Naruto stood motionless, processing the information. Eida watched him, her heart pounding. She saw the flicker of the man he used to be, the protector who loved his home, warring with the cold, logical being he was becoming. He had been a defender his whole life. A savior. But a savior reacts. A king acts. He finally moved, his head lifting to look at the star-dusted sky. A decision had been made. The conflict in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. He turned his gaze back to them, but his focus was solely on Eida. He saw her not as the girl who needed training, not as a beautiful weapon, but as his single most valuable asset. The all-seeing eye. Waiting for them to come here is a losing strategy, he said, his voice devoid of all warmth, resonating with the authority of a law being written. He took a step toward her, a king choosing his vanguard. Eida. Get ready. Her breath hitched. The way he said her name, it was a summons. We're going hunting. Chapter 3, The orbital throne. The air in the Hokage's office was a vacuum of unspoken tension. Shikamaru stood stiffly by the window, his gaze fixed on the moon, a pale, scarred disk in the pre-dawn sky. Amato was hunched over a console, his fingers flying across a holographic keyboard, muttering about dimensional frequency and quantum entanglement. Demon sat perched on the edge of the desk, swinging his legs, a ball of restless energy that threatened to explode at any moment. Eida stood beside Naruto, who was staring at a three-dimensional map of the Earth and its lunar orbit projected over his desk. He hadn't spoken in 10 minutes, but the intensity of his focus was a tangible force, pulling the room into his orbit. The coordinates are unstable, Amato announced, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. Opening a rift to a specific location on the moon is not like using a standard spacetime jutsu. The object we're aiming for, it exists in a state of partial dimensional flux. It's there, but it's also not. I can get you to the general vicinity, but the final approach will be imprecise. Define imprecise, Naruto said, his voice a low, calm rumble that cut through Amato's nervous chatter. You could materialize inside solid rock. Or a few thousand kilometers out in open space. The margin for error is substantial. Demon hopped off the desk. So what? We'll just hold our breath. Sounds fun. You don't have lungs, you have nutrient processors, Eida shot back, her tone sharp. Some of us require oxygen. Naruto ignored their bickering. His silver-blue eyes traced a path across the lunar map, landing on a dark, shadowed crater near the southern pole. It was a region labeled simply as Mare Incognitum, the unknown sea. Ancient records, predating even the Sage of Six Paths, spoke of it as a place of bad omens. A place where the sky met the earth in unnatural ways. Here, Naruto said, pointing a single finger at the crater. Aim for this. Amato's eyes widened behind his glasses. Hokage-sama, that's the most unstable region. The gravitational and dimensional readings there are chaotic. It's a whirlpool of spatial distortion. Exactly, Naruto replied. It's chaotic because something powerful is actively warping spacetime to conceal itself. It's a lock. I need you to get me to the keyhole. I'll handle the rest. There was no room for argument in his voice. It was a statement of fact, an instruction based on a level of perception Amato couldn't begin to fathom. The scientist simply nodded, his face pale, and returned to his console. Naruto turned to Eida. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the clinical, analytical edge to his gaze softened for a fraction of a second. Your Senrigan will be our compass. The moment we are through the rift, I need you to find the source of the distortion. Don't look for a building. Look for the point where reality is being bent the hardest. She met his gaze, her heart giving a strange flutter. He was relying on her. Not just her power, but her. The distinction was subtle, but it was everything. I can do that. Good. He looked over at Demon. You are on defense. Your only job is to protect your sister. Anything comes at her, you intercept it. Understood? Demon puffed out his chest, a grin spreading across his face. Finally, something to hit. You got it, boss. Naruto gave a curt nod. Amato. Now. Amato hit a final sequence on his console. A device in the center of the room, a complex amalgamation of Kara technology and Uzumaki sealing arrays, hummed to life. The air began to vibrate, and a shimmering, vertical line of pure blackness appeared, splitting reality like a tear in fabric. It widened into a churning, unstable gateway, the edges flickering with violet energy. The sound was like grinding stone and shattering glass. It's open. Amato shouted over the din, I can't hold it for long. Naruto didn't hesitate. He strode toward the rift, his presence a calming anchor in the storm of chaotic energy. He paused at the edge and looked back, his gaze locking with Aida's. It was a silent command. With me. She walked to his side. Demon fell in behind them. Together, they stepped through the gate and into the void. The transition was nauseating. It was not a journey, it was a cessation of being. For a timeless instant, there was no light, no sound, no self. Eida felt her consciousness fraying at the edges, dissolving into the non-space between dimensions. Then, a hand clamped down on her wrist. It was Naruto's. His grip was an anchor of absolute reality in the sea of nothingness. It held her together, a singular point of focus in the uncreation. Then, they were through. They emerged into a silent, breathtaking spectacle. They were standing on nothing, floating in the stark, black vacuum of space. Below them, the moon was a colossal, pockmarked sphere of gray and white. Above, the earth hung like a swirl of blue and white marble, a jewel of impossible beauty and fragility. The silence was absolute, a pressure on the ears that was more profound than any sound. A thin, shimmering film of golden energy enveloped the three of them, a near-invisible layer that held in a bubble of breathable air and protected them from the vacuum. It emanated from Naruto, a passive exertion of his will, as natural to him now as breathing. Demon let out a low whistle, spinning in a slow circle. Whoa! Aida's attention was fixed on the earth. She had seen it countless times with her Senrigan, a detached, God's-eye view. But to be here, to see it with her own eyes, to feel its silent, majestic presence, it was humbling. It was the world he was trying to protect. The home of the man who saw her. Eida, Naruto's voice cut through her reverie, grounding her. Report. She tore her gaze away from the earth and focused. She closed her eyes, letting her Senrigan stretch out, not through time, but through the fabric of space. Amato had been right. The area was a mess of spatial folds and gravitational knots. But Naruto had also been right. It wasn't random chaos. It was a pattern. A defense mechanism. And at its heart. There, she said, her eyes snapping open. She pointed toward the surface of the moon, at a spot that looked no different from any other stretch of gray dust. It's about 500 meters below the surface. A structure. It's not just hidden, it's phased. It's occupying the same space as the moon rock, but in a different dimensional frequency. It's like a ghost. Naruto nodded, his gaze following her finger. A phase cloak. Standard Otsutsuki long-term concealment. He looked at the barren landscape. We need to get to it. He didn't wait for a suggestion. He simply dropped. Gravity took hold, and the three of them began to fall toward the lunar surface. The silent descent was unnerving. Eida felt a spike of panic, but a glance at Naruto's calm, impassive face quelled it. This was part of his plan. He was in control. They accelerated, the cratered surface rushing up to meet them. Just as it seemed they would be smashed to pieces against the gray rock, Naruto raised a hand. A wave of force, the same silent pressure he'd used on Code, radiated from him. The ground beneath them didn't just crack, it dissolved, turning from solid rock into a cloud of fine dust. They plunged through the cloud and into the darkness below, landing with a soft thud in a vast, cavernous space. The bubble of air and pressure held firm around them. The dust settled, revealing a truly ancient and magnificent sight. They were standing at the entrance to a long, vaulted hallway. The walls, floor, and ceiling were carved from a single piece of lustrous, black material that seemed to drink the light. Pale blue lines of energy pulsed rhythmically within the walls, casting a soft, ethereal glow. The architecture was elegant, alien, and impossibly old. It was a remnant of a bygone era, Tone's castle repurposed and built upon, a forgotten bastion of a fallen dynasty. So this is an Otsutsuki outpost, Demon said, his voice echoing in the cavernous silence. Fancy. Naruto's eyes were already scanning the corridor, his senses mapping every detail. It's not just an outpost. It's a repository. A throne room in exile. As if on cue, the air began to hum. From alcoves in the walls, figures emerged. They were puppets, but not the crude wooden contraptions of a shinobi puppeteer. These were sleek, humanoid constructs of the same black material as the walls, their featureless faces glowing with a single, blue optic sensor. They moved with a silent, lethal grace, their limbs unfolding into long, sharp blades. Guardians, Naruto stated. Automated, and likely still active. Demon cracked his knuckles, a wide, eager grin on his face. Finally. My turn. Before Naruto or Eida could react, he shot forward, a tiny juggernaut of gleeful violence. The first puppet lunged, its blade arms slashing in a silver arc. Demon, with his uncanny ability, didn't even need to touch it. He simply met its intent with his own. The puppet's arm, aimed at Demon, suddenly twisted impossibly, the blade redirecting back toward its own head. It decapitated itself in a shower of blue sparks. Another puppet fired a beam of concentrated energy from its chest. Demon laughed, and the beam bent in mid-air, slamming into a different puppet and vaporizing its torso. He was a whirlwind of reflected destruction, cackling as the Guardians' own attacks were turned against them. They were designed to fight intruders with killing intent, and against Demon, that was a fatal flaw. Naruto watched for a moment, his expression unreadable. His ability is effective against mindless drones. Let him clear the path. He turned his attention to Eida. The real defenses won't be so simple. The Otsutsuki prized subtlety. Look for traps that aren't based on intent. Pressure plates, psychic triggers, genetic scanners. They began to walk down the corridor, following in the wake of Demon's gleeful rampage. Eida walked beside Naruto, her senses extended, her mind a map of the ancient fortress. She pointed out a section of the floor that hummed with a different energy frequency. Naruto stepped over it without breaking stride. She warned him of a psychic field designed to induce madness in non-Otsutsuki minds. He simply walked through it, the field dissolving against his will like mist in the sun. They moved in perfect sync, a seamless unit. His overwhelming power and her all-seeing perception. It felt right. Natural. He didn't praise her for her warnings, he simply acted on them, an implicit trust that was more valuable than any words. They reached the end of the long hall, which opened into a vast, circular chamber. In the center of the chamber, on a raised dais, sat a throne. It was carved from the same black, light-absorbing material, but it was grander, etched with complex celestial patterns that glowed with a faint, silver light. The air here was heavy, thick with the residue of immense power. Demon, having finished off the last of the puppets, ran into the chamber, skidding to a halt. Whoa! Now that's a chair. But they were not alone. Standing before the throne, as if it had been waiting for them, was a new figure. It was not a puppet. It was tall and slender, clad in flowing white robes that seemed woven from moonlight. Its skin was pale gray, and its long, white hair was tied in an intricate knot. It had no discernible facial features, only a smooth, blank expanse where a face should be. It held a long, thin staff made of a crystalline material. A remnant guardian, Naruto said, his voice low. More advanced than the puppets. It's bound to the throne itself. The faceless guardian raised its staff. The crystal at the tip began to glow with a menacing red light. Demon charged. I got this. He lunged, aiming a flying kick. But as he flew toward the guardian, it did not react with killing intent. It simply tapped the base of its staff on the floor. A wave of crimson energy, utterly devoid of malice, washed over Demon. His reflection ability had nothing to target. The energy slammed into him, and he was thrown backward as if hit by a physical object, skidding across the floor and crashing into the far wall. He slumped to the ground, groaning. "Demon!" Eida cried out, starting toward him. "Stay back," Naruto ordered, his voice sharp. He took a step forward, placing himself between her and the Guardian. That was a null energy wave. It attacks the body directly, bypassing esoteric defenses. It's an anti-Otsutsuki weapon, designed to subdue rogue clan members. The Guardian glided forward, its movements silent and fluid. It raised its staff again, the crystal glowing brighter. It was preparing another, more powerful blast. Naruto moved. He didn't charge. He flowed. His fighting style was no longer the brawling, head-on assault of his youth. It was a fusion of the frog Kumite's natural energy and the lethal, precise grace of Otsutsuki taijutsu. He closed the distance in an instant, his body a blur. The Guardian swung its staff in a wide, horizontal arc. Naruto didn't block it. He dropped to one knee, the staff hissing over his head, and drove his palm upward into the Guardian's chest. It wasn't a gentle fist strike, it was a focused blast of his own innate authority. There was no explosion. The Guardian simply froze. Cracks, like splintering ice, spread across its body from the point of impact. Then, with a soft, crystalline chime, it crumbled into a pile of shimmering dust. The chamber fell silent again. Naruto stood up, brushing a non-existent speck of dust from his shirt. He looked at the pile of crystal dust, then at the throne. He had dispatched a Guardian capable of disabling Demon with a single, effortless blow. Eida stared, her breath caught in her throat. The sheer, understated economy of his power was more terrifying and more impressive than any Raisin Shuriken. He walked up the dais and stood before the throne. It seemed to recognize him, the silver light in its etched patterns glowing brighter, pulsing in time with a heartbeat only he could hear. He looked back at Eida. For the first time since his transformation, a hint of his old self, a flicker of uncertainty, touched his features. He was about to cross a threshold from which there was no return. He was about to leave his humanity behind. It was in the silence of space, in this cold, dead castle, that the facades finally crumbled. The weight of his impending choice was a visible thing. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" he asked, his voice quiet, stripped of its kingly authority, leaving only the man. The question caught her off guard. She had been so focused on her own fear and awe that she hadn't considered his perspective. "Everyone else is," he continued, his gaze distant. "Shikamaru, the Kage, even my own son. They look at me and see a monster wearing a familiar face. But you look at me and you're not afraid." She thought for a moment, the answer forming in her heart before her mind could shape the words. "Because for my entire life, everyone has looked at me and seen something I'm not. They see a goddess, a dream, a prize. They love a fantasy. You're the first person who has ever looked at me and seen a tool. A weapon. You see what I am, not what my power makes people think I am. And you're not impressed by it. You just see the potential. How can I be afraid of the only person who sees the real me?" Her voice was soft, trembling with a vulnerability she hadn't known she possessed. "You don't want to possess me. You want to utilize me. And in a strange way, that feels more honest than love ever has." A profound silence settled between them. In the cold, sterile light of the throne room, a connection was forged. Not of romance, not of passion, but of mutual recognition. Two beings, altered and isolated by immense power, finding a strange solace in one another's presence. Naruto's gaze softened. He looked from her to the throne, and the uncertainty in his eyes hardened into resolve. He was doing this not just for his world, but for the chance to build a new one, a place where beings like them could have a purpose beyond being feared or worshipped. He turned and sat upon the throne. The moment his body made contact with the black stone, the entire fortress screamed. The blue energy lines in the walls flared into a blinding white. A column of pure, silver energy erupted from the throne, engulfing Naruto completely. Eida and a now-recovering demon shielded their eyes. The power in the room was immense, ancient, and terrifying. It was the power of a vacant kingship, a cosmic mantle of power, recognizing its long-lost heir. The light receded, and Naruto was still there, sitting on the throne. But he was changed. A halo of shimmering, silver energy, like a crown forged from a captured nebula, hovered a few inches above his head. It spun slowly, a tangible manifestation of his new authority. His eyes, now a permanent, brilliant silver, held the depth of galaxies. He was no longer Naruto Uzumaki, the Hokage of Konoha. He was something more. Something older. He looked at Eida, and his voice, when he spoke, was no longer just a voice. It was a decree. Kneel. Aida's body moved without thought. She dropped to one knee before the dais, her head bowed. It wasn't an act of submission forced by power. It was an act of willing fealty. She was not kneeling to a master. She was pledging herself to a cause, to a king she finally believed in. "I am your blade and your eye," she said, her voice clear and strong, echoing in the vast chamber. "I pledge myself to you, my king." From the corner of the room, a new voice spoke, cold and laced with intellectual contempt. "A mongrel king and his broken doll. How quaint." Naruto's head snapped up. Eida spun around. Standing in the entrance to the chamber, where the guardian's dust was still settling, was a new figure. He was Otsutsuki, that much was clear from his pale skin and the single, sharp horn protruding from his forehead. But his bearing was different from Momoshiki or Ishiki. He wore a severe, high-collared black uniform, and his white hair was cut short and precise. His eyes, a chilling shade of amethyst, regarded them with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an inferior species. He radiated an aura of cold, sharp intellect and immense, disciplined power. This was no brawling god. This was a celestial scholar. A lawkeeper. Naruto rose from the throne, the silver halo above his head blazing with sudden intensity. The air in the room grew heavy enough to crush steel. "You must be one of the Curia," Naruto said, his voice a low growl of thunder. The newcomer gave a slight, condescending inclination of his head. "I am Vex. And I am here to correct this grammatical error in the fabric of reality." He raised a hand, and the space between him and the throne began to warp and fold, twisting into a kaleidoscope of impossible geometry. The very laws of physics were unraveling. "Your reign," Vex said with a thin, cruel smile, "is over before it has even begun." Chapter 4, Echoes of Shirbai. The throne room had ceased to exist. One moment, Eida was on the cold, black floor of an ancient lunar fortress, the next, she was standing on a platform of obsidian glass suspended in a swirling vortex of emerald and gold. The air was thin, tasting of burnt sugar and static electricity. Gravity was a fickle suggestion, pulling first toward a floor that wasn't there, then toward a ceiling of roiling clouds. They were inside a pocket dimension, a bubble of manufactured reality spun from Vex's will. Demon was back on his feet, looking around with a disoriented scowl. "What is this? Some kind of genjutsu?" "No," Naruto's voice cut through the chaos, "an anchor of stability." He stood on the platform opposite them, the silver halo above his head pulsing with a steady, defiant light. He looked completely unperturbed, as if the shattering of dimensional physics was a minor inconvenience. "It's a reality marble. A personalized dimension. He's pulled us into his domain, where he dictates the laws." Vex hovered in the center of the vortex, his black uniform a stark slash against the brilliant chaos. He regarded Naruto with the smug satisfaction of a master strategist who had just sprung the perfect trap. "Impressive. You grasp the fundamentals, at least. Most primitive organisms simply go mad when their perception of reality is forcibly dismantled." "I'm a fast learner," Naruto replied, his silver eyes narrowing. "Are you?" Vex mused, tilting his head. "Let's test that theory." He snapped his fingers. The obsidian platform beneath Eida and Demon's feet vanished. They plunged into the swirling chaos. Eida cried out, the vertigo overwhelming. But before they could fall more than a few feet, a new platform of black glass materialized beneath them, catching them. Then it vanished again. They were being toyed with, dropped and caught like dolls in a cosmic game. Stop it! Eida yelled, her Senrigan struggling to find purchase in a reality that was constantly rewriting itself. Your little knight is useless here, Mongrel King, Vex taunted, his focus entirely on Naruto. His ability reflects intent. My power has no intent. It is simply the application of principle. The boy is a broken tool. And the girl, her eyes can see all that is, but what good are they when, is a concept I can change at will. To prove his point, the dimension fractured. Suddenly, Eida was standing in a field of swaying ramen noodles as tall as trees. A heartbeat later, she was underwater, surrounded by giant, luminous koi fish. Then, she was in a perfect replica of the Konoha graveyard, the names of all her friends etched on the stones. Vex was attacking her mind, using the Senrigan's own input against her, flooding it with disjointed, nonsensical realities. Eida. Demon's voice was a distant echo. Naruto acted. He didn't shout or charge. He closed his eyes for a single second, and the silver halo above his head flared with blinding intensity. A wave of pure, silent authority washed through the pocket dimension. It wasn't an attack. It was a negation. A sovereign decree. The pocket dimension didn't shatter, it simply yielded. The swirling vortex of color stuttered and froze. The shifting realities around Eida collapsed, leaving her back on a stable, solid platform of black glass. The oppressive, chaotic energy vanished, replaced by the cold, neutral silence of Naruto's own dominion. Vex stared, his condescending smile finally gone, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock. You overwrote my law. With no technique? No jutsu. Your dimension is a paragraph, Naruto stated, his voice resonating with power. He took a step forward, the obsidian floor cracking under his feet. My will is the page it's written on. I am the context. You are the footnote. He moved. It was not a run, not a flash step. He simply ceased to be in one place and appeared in another, crossing the 50-foot gap between them in an instant. His fist, glowing with the contained energy of a sun, drove toward Vex's chest. Vex, recovering his composure, raised a hand. A dozen miniature pocket dimensions, each a swirling vortex of razor-sharp crystal, materialized in front of him, forming a layered shield. Clever words will not save you. Naruto's fist slammed into the first shield. The sound was not an explosion. It was the chime of a universe breaking. The miniature dimension shattered, not from force, but because Naruto's will denied its right to exist. He punched through the second, the third, the fourth. He was not just breaking through barriers, he was punching holes in reality itself, one layer at a time. The very fabric of Vex's power was being shredded by raw, physical assertion. Vex's eyes widened in horror. This wasn't a fight. This was an argument, and Naruto's logic was irrefutable. Naruto's fist broke through the final shield and slammed into Vex's chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Vex looked down at the fist embedded in his sternum, a confused look on his face. Then, a spiderweb of silver cracks appeared on his skin, spreading outwards from Naruto's knuckles. You see, Naruto said, his voice a low, lethal whisper. The problem with living inside a bubble is that you forget what it feels like when it pops. Vex opened his mouth to scream, but only dust came out. His body, his robes, his very being, disintegrated into a cloud of fine, gray particles that were then annihilated by the sheer pressure of Naruto's presence. The pocket dimension, its creator now erased, collapsed. They were back in the lunar throne room. The air was still and silent. The dust of the former remnant guardian lay undisturbed. It was as if no time had passed at all. Demon stared at the spot where Vex had been, his mouth hanging open. Did you just punch a dimension to death? Naruto withdrew his fist, the celestial glow fading. He looked at his hand, then back at the throne. The battle had been trivial. A test of his new capabilities. He had passed. Eida looked at him, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. He hadn't just fought an Otsutsuki, he had deconstructed him, peeling back the layers of his power and shattering them with contemptuous ease. He was operating on a level where the laws of physics were merely suggestions. Let's go, Naruto said, his voice pulling her back to the present. He walked off the dais, the silver crown of energy fading from view, though the authority it represented remained. We've announced our claim. The next move is theirs. We need to be back on Earth before they make it. He placed a hand on her shoulder and another on Demon's. The world around them dissolved, not into the chaos of a rift, but into a smooth, seamless transition. There was no vertigo, no sense of falling. Space simply reconfigured itself around them. A moment later, they were standing in the Hokage's office. The sun was just beginning to cast its first golden rays over the village. The entire lunar expedition had taken less than an hour. Amado and Shikamaru stared at them, their faces a mixture of relief and astonishment. You're back. Shikamaru breathed. The rift closed, we lost your signal. What happened? We secured the outpost, Naruto said, walking to the window and looking out at his village. And we eliminated the first member of the Curia. Amado's glasses nearly fell off his face. Eliminated? One of the Eternum Curia. But, how? He was insufficient, Naruto stated, the words carrying a chilling finality. He turned to Shikamaru. The game has changed. They know I've claimed the seat of the Heir. They will no longer send single agents. They will move against the system itself. What's the status of the planet? Shikamaru, still reeling, forced himself to focus. Widespread panic, as expected. But something else is happening. Strange reports are coming in from all over the elemental nations. In the land of Earth, shinobi are reporting that their Doton jutsu are failing, turning to mud in their hands. In the hidden mist, water-style techniques are evaporating into steam. It's sporadic, but it's spreading. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He closed them, and Eida could feel his senses expanding, spreading out from the office to encompass the entire village, then the nation, then the continent. It was like watching a drop of ink spread through water. It's not the jutsu that are failing, he said, his eyes snapping open. It's the chakra network itself. He's infected it. He? Shikamaru asked. Who? Before Naruto could answer, a figure shimmered into existence in the middle of the office. There was no rift, no distortion. He was simply not there, and then he was. He was Otsutsuki, but unlike the arrogant Vex, he carried an air of serene, terrifying dignity. He was tall and regal, with piercing, intelligent eyes the color of twilight. He wore robes of pristine white, embroidered with complex silver patterns that seemed to shift and move. His long, silver hair was bound by a single, simple ring, and a pair of small, elegant horns curved back from his temples. He looked less like a warrior and more like a high priest or a king. He held no weapon, but the disciplined power radiating from him was 1,000 times more intimidating than Vex's chaotic energy. He looked around the office, his gaze passing over Amado, Shikamaru, and Demon with polite disinterest. Then his eyes settled on Eida, and for a moment, they held a flicker of academic curiosity. The salvaged echo of Shirbai's vanity. A fascinating, if tragic, application of divine power. Finally, his gaze met Naruto's. There was no animosity in his eyes. Only a deep, profound disappointment, like a master craftsman looking upon a flawed, but beautiful, creation. So, the newcomer said, his voice calm and melodic, you are the aberration. The child playing with the instruments of creation. Demon stepped forward, his body tensing. Who the hell are you? The Otsutsuki's gaze did not waver from Naruto's. I am Araki, the adjudicator of the Curia, the voice of cosmic order. And I have come to offer you a choice. I'm not interested in your choices, Naruto said, his own power beginning to rise, a silent pressure that made the very air in the room feel thick. You will be, Araki replied calmly. Vex was a zealot. A blunt instrument. He believed that any deviation from the great timeline was a heresy to be purged. I am more pragmatic. I see not a flaw, but an opportunity. An experiment. He gestured gracefully toward the window. This world. It is a beautiful, chaotic, vibrant anomaly. A world where chakra, a power meant for gods, was given to mortals. It has produced endless war, suffering, and pain. But it has also produced, you. A being who stands on the precipice of godhood, yet clings to the mud of his origins. It is a paradox I find fascinating. Get to the point, Naruto growled. The point, Araki said, is a debate. A philosophical contest, if you will. You believe your connection to this world, your love for these fleeting mortals, is a source of strength. I posit that it is your greatest weakness. A king who loves the ants under his feet cannot rule the heavens. His gaze will forever be drawn downwards, and he will inevitably be dragged into the dirt with them. He smiled, a serene, almost gentle expression. So, I have initiated a test. I have introduced a catalyst into your world's chakra network. A subtle degenerative algorithm based on Shirbai's own power of creation. A divine rot. It will not destroy chakra, merely unravel it. It will slowly and painlessly return the energy of this world to its primordial state. Mortals will lose their ability to perform their little tricks. They will return to being what they were always meant to be. Simple, powerless creatures, living and dying at the whims of nature. Shikamaru's face went ashen. You're erasing ninjutsu. A crude but accurate summary, Araki acknowledged. And here is my offer to you, Heir. You can ascend. Embrace your power. Cast off the anchor of this world and take your rightful place on the throne. If you do, I will halt the rot. This world will be spared, quarantined as a nature preserve. A monument to a failed experiment. Or, you can refuse. You can cling to your humanity, fight for a world that is dissolving around you. And in doing so, you will prove my point. You will be dragged down with them, and the Curia's original verdict of sterilization will be carried out. It was a diabolical choice. Abandon his world to save it, or fight for it and doom it. Eida watched Naruto, her heart pounding. She saw the storm in his eyes, the conflict between the Hokage and the king. Araki had not challenged him to a fight. He had challenged the very core of his being. Naruto was silent for a long moment. Then, he let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a cold, humorless sound. That's your test, he said. You think taking away our toys will break us? You think chakra is what makes us strong? He took a step forward, his silver eyes blazing. You're a fool. You've read the history of this world, but you haven't understood a single page. Our power was never in our jutsu. It's in here. He tapped his chest. It's the will to stand up when you're beaten down. The determination to protect the person next to you. You can take our chakra. You can take our ninjutsu. It doesn't matter. We will find another way. We will fight you with sticks and stones if we have to. Araki's serene expression faltered for the first time. He had expected Naruto to be angry, to be desperate. He had not expected such fiery, absolute defiance. Your sentiment is touching, but ultimately futile, Araki said, regaining his composure. You cannot fight a concept. Then I'll find a way to punch that, too, Naruto shot back. But I think a demonstration is in order. You want a test. Fine. Let's have a game of laws. Right here. Right now. Araki looked intrigued. A game of laws? You propose a contest of will and ability? I accept. What are the terms? Simple, Naruto said, a dangerous glint in his eye. You summon your strongest pawn. A creature that feeds on chakra, making all of our ninjutsu useless against it. I will defeat it. I will not use any Otsutsuki abilities. I will not use Kurama's lingering chakra. I will win using only the power of this world. The power you hold in such contempt. A slow, genuine smile spread across Araki's face. This was better than he could have hoped. A controlled environment to see the aberration's true limits. An excellent proposal, he said. Very well. He raised his hand, and a sphere of black energy, crackling with negative power, formed above his palm. This beast is a gaki, a hunger spirit from the space between worlds. It consumes all forms of processed energy. Chakra is its favorite meal. It cannot be harmed by what it eats. The sphere expanded, and from it, a creature unfolded itself. It was a horror of sinew and bone, a vaguely canine beast the size of a rhinoceros. It had no eyes, only a gaping maw filled with rows of needle-like teeth. Its skin was a translucent gray, and through it, you could see a swirling vortex of stolen energy in its belly. It let out a low growl, a sound that seemed to suck the very warmth from the air. The gaki fixed its non-existent gaze on Naruto, sensing the immense well of power within him, and charged. The office exploded. The beast's charge shattered the wall, carrying Naruto out into the open air above Konoha. They landed in the street below with a ground-shaking impact, scattering terrified civilians. Eida and the others rushed to the shattered opening, looking down at the scene. The gaki was a whirlwind of destruction, lunging at Naruto, its claws tearing up the street. Naruto, true to his word, was not using any of his new abilities. He was dodging, weaving, a blur of black and orange, relying on pure physical skill. But it was a losing battle. He couldn't use a Rasengan, the beast would just eat it. He couldn't use his truth-seeking orbs. Any chakra-based attack would only make it stronger. He's going to lose. Demon shouted. He needs to just blast it. No, Eida said, her eyes wide, her Senrigan seeing not just the fight, but the energy flows around it. He's not losing. He's learning. Down below, Naruto dodged another savage lunge, his feet skidding on the pavement. The gaki was relentless, its hunger driving it into a frenzy. It opened its maw and fired a beam of pure, raw chakra, the combined energy of all the jutsu it had ever consumed. Naruto didn't dodge. He stood his ground, his hands flashing through a series of hand signs that were ancient and unfamiliar to everyone watching. They were not for a ninjutsu. He slammed his palm on the ground. Sage art, Earth Mother's embrace. The ground beneath the gaki didn't erupt. It softened. The stone and pavement turned to thick, grasping mud, not through a Doton jutsu, but by Naruto influencing the natural water and earth that were already there. The gaki's charge slowed, its legs sinking into the mire. At the same time, Naruto took a deep breath, drawing in the natural energy of the world. His sage mode activated, the orange pigmentation appearing around his eyes. But this was different. It was deeper, more potent. He wasn't just borrowing nature's energy, he was commanding it. He formed no Rasengan. He simply held up a hand. The trees lining the street began to writhe and twist, their branches extending like wooden spears, their roots tearing up from the ground like grasping tentacles. They were not infused with his chakra. They were being compelled by his will, animated by the life force they already possessed. The roots wrapped around the gaki's legs, holding it fast. The branches, hardened to the consistency of steel, pierced its hide. The gaki roared in pain and surprise, then in fury. It unleashed a massive wave of chakra, expecting to disintegrate the trees. But the trees had no chakra to be disrupted. They were pure nature. The blast washed over them, scorching the wood but not destroying them. You see, Araki, Naruto's voice called out, calm and clear. You think chakra is the only power here. But this world is alive. And it listens to its king. He appeared above the struggling Gaki, descending with an axe kick. His heel, glowing with a soft green aura of pure nature energy, slammed down on the beast's head. The impact was silent. A ripple of green light spread through the Gaki's body. The stolen chakra within it, the swirling vortex of corrupt energy, was neutralized, rendered inert by the overwhelming purity of the planet's life force. The Gaki shuddered, and then dissolved into a pile of black ash and dust. Silence. The street was a ruin, but the threat was gone. Up in the office, Araki stood at the broken window, looking down at the scene. The serene, condescending smile was gone. His face was a mask of cold, hard calculation. He had made a critical error. He had underestimated not Naruto, but the very world he sought to control. He had assumed it was a passive resource. He had not realized it could become an active participant. The game is not over, Araki said, his voice a low whisper. He looked at Naruto, who was now looking back up at him, his sage mode receding. You have won this round, aberration. You've proven your bond with this world has applications. But in doing so, you have only strengthened my resolve. His form began to flicker. Enjoy your small victory. Enjoy this world while it lasts. For a king who is bound to the soil cannot fly. And the rot I have sown is only the beginning. With a final, disappointed look, he vanished. Naruto stood in the ruined street, the cheers of the civilians just beginning to register. He had won the battle. He had protected his people. But as he looked up at the sky, a deep, chilling understanding settled in his gut. Araki had not been trying to win. He had been gathering data. And the divine rot, the slow, silent decay of his world's power, was still spreading. He had won the game, but the board itself was crumbling beneath his feet. Chapter 5, Fracture. The world began to fray at the edges. Araki's divine rot was not a cataclysm, it was a creeping sickness, a slow, silent unraveling of the very fabric of shinobi society. At first, it was a minor inconvenience. A genin's clone jutsu would fizzle into a puff of smoke. A chunin's fireball would emerge as a lukewarm gust of air. But within a week, the decay had accelerated with terrifying speed. In Iwagakure, proud earth-movers found themselves unable to lift a single pebble with their chakra. In Kirigakure, the famed assassins of the mist discovered their hiding techniques were failing, their water prisons collapsing into harmless puddles. The chakra that had been a shinobi's birthright, their sword and shield, was becoming a fickle, unreliable memory. Panic was a contagion, spreading faster than any plague. The global economy, built on the back of mission contracts and chakra-based infrastructure, began to shudder. Nations that relied on shinobi for defense were suddenly vulnerable. Ancient rivalries, long suppressed by the threat of mutually assured destruction via ninjutsu, began to stir. The epicenter of the world's fear and anger was Konoha. And its target was Naruto Uzumaki. He stood in the Kage's council room, a space that had once been a symbol of unity, now a chamber of accusation. The holographic forms of the other Kage were sharp and clear, their faces etched with desperation and blame. Shikamaru stood beside Naruto, a stack of grim reports in his hand. Eida and Demon were absent, tasked with a more direct mission. My village is defenseless, Naruto. Kuratsuchi's voice was ragged, stripped of its usual bravado. We have reports of rogue samurai from the land of iron massing at our borders. Without our Doton barriers, we'll be overrun in a day. Your plan has failed. This Araki is dismantling us piece by piece. The cloud is facing similar issues, Darui added, his expression grim. Feudal lords from smaller nations are testing our borders, sensing weakness. My shinobi are reduced to common soldiers. Morale is at rock bottom. This can't go on, Chojuro pleaded, his face pale. The people are terrified. They're saying this is a divine punishment. They're saying you've brought this curse upon us. Only Gaara remained silent, his gaze fixed on Naruto, his expression one of pained understanding. He knew this was not a problem that could be solved with anger. Naruto listened, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He let them vent their fear, their fury. He absorbed it all, a silent dam holding back a flood. The divine rod is not a jutsu to be countered, he said finally, his voice cutting through the rising tide of panic. It was quiet, yet it commanded the room. It is a conceptual attack on the planet's energy system. Araki is not just turning off our ninjutsu. He is trying to force a choice, my ascension, or this world's slow death. Then maybe it's time you made that choice. Kuratsuchi shot back. What is one man, even you, compared to the entire world? Abdicate. Surrender to them. Whatever it takes to make this stop. A murmur of assent went through Chojuro and even Darui looked conflicted. The feudal lord of the Land of Fire had sent a missive that morning, a thinly veiled demand that the Otsutsuki problem be dealt with, even if it meant sacrificing the Hokage. The political pressure was becoming unbearable. Sacrificing me will not save you, Naruto stated, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. It will only hasten the end. The Curia will not spare a world they deem contaminated. They will simply sterilize it without a fight. My presence here is the only reason you are still breathing. I am not the cause of this crisis. I am the only possible solution. He looked at each of them in turn, his silver eyes piercing through the holographic static. You are thinking like politicians, trying to appease an enemy who only deals in absolutes. You need to start thinking like soldiers. The age of shinobi is over. The age of survival has begun. Reinforce your borders with conventional means. Arm your people. Prepare for a war fought not with jutsu, but with steel and will. I will deal with Araki. Your job is to hold the line. He cut the transmission before they could argue further, leaving the four Kage staring at an empty screen. Shikamaru let out a long, weary sigh. That's not going to be enough, Naruto. They're breaking. The feudal lords are forming a coalition. They're planning to issue a joint demand for your resignation, backed by the threat of a full-scale invasion of the Land of Fire by their samurai armies. They can try, Naruto said, turning away from the screen. They're not the only ones, Shikamaru warned. There's a faction within our own village. The civilian council, merchants, even some of the older shinobi clans who have lost their power. They're organizing a protest. They see you as a threat now, not a protector. This is getting out of control. It's a drag. Naruto walked to the window, his gaze sweeping over the village. He could feel the unrest, the fear, the anger simmering below. It was a poison, and Araki was letting the world poison itself. Then we will control it, he said. He raised a hand to his ear, where a small, almost invisible communications device was nestled. Eida. Report. Miles away, in the opulent, silk-draped capital city of the Land of Fire, Eida stood in the shadows of a pagoda rooftop, looking down at the feudal lord's palace. The air here was different from Konoha. It was thick with perfume, intrigue, and the cloying scent of unearned power. Demon was perched beside her, looking bored. The meeting is starting, she said into her comms unit, her senrigan focused on the grand chamber within the palace. The daimyo of fire, earth, wind, water, and lightning. Just as you predicted. Good, Naruto's voice replied, clear and calm in her ear. The daimyo of fire is the ringleader. He believes he can force my hand, use this crisis to reassert the authority of the feudal lords over the Kage. He is mistaken. Inside the chamber, the 5 most powerful non-shinobi leaders in the world were seated around a low, polished table. The motion is agreed, Then, the fire daimyo, a portly man with a face like a pampered bulldog, announced. We will issue the ultimatum. The Jinchuriki Hokage will surrender himself to these curia for judgment, or the combined might of our samurai will march on Konoha. We will cut the head off the snake and restore order. Are we certain this is wise? The Wind Daimyo, a younger, more cautious man, asked. To declare war on the leaf. The leaf is nothing without its jutsu, the Earth Daimyo scoffed. They are farmers with sharp knives. We have true armies. This is our chance to put the hidden villages back in their place, to remind them who truly rules these lands. Eida relayed the conversation to Naruto, her voice a monotone whisper. They are insects, arguing over a leaf while the boot descends, Naruto's voice replied. Eida, you have your instructions. No fatalities. No permanent harm. But they must understand the new hierarchy. They must understand that their authority is an illusion. Make them fear. A slow, cruel smile touched Ida's lips. It was the first time he had ever asked her to unleash her power, to be the monster others saw her as. But it was for him. For his plan. That made all the difference. With pleasure, my king, she whispered. She dropped from the rooftop, a silent shadow. The palace guards, elite samurai trained to fight shinobi, were a joke. Her charm washed over them before they could even register her presence. They dropped to their knees, their swords clattering to the ground, their faces filled with blissful adoration as she walked past. She reached the doors to the grand chamber. The 2 guards stationed there, giants of men in lacquered armor, simply bowed and opened the doors for her. She stepped inside. The 5 daimyo looked up, their conversation cut short. A collective gasp went through the room. They were men accustomed to the finest things in life, to beauty bought and sold. But they had never seen anything like her. It was like the sun had walked into the room. Her power, the irresistible charm of omnipotence, slammed into them. Their political maneuvering, their arrogance, their ambition, it all evaporated, replaced by a single, overwhelming thought: they had to please her. They had to have her approval. The fire daimyo, who moments before had been plotting war, scrambled to his feet, nearly tripping over his own robes. My lady! An unexpected honor. To what do we owe this divine pleasure? Eida walked slowly into the center of the room, her movements fluid and hypnotic. She did not look at them. She let the power do the work, let it worm its way into the deepest corners of their minds, rewriting their motivations. Demon sauntered in behind her, cracking his knuckles. All right, which one do I get to hit first? Eida held up a hand, a silent command for him to wait. She finally let her gaze drift over the 5 powerful men, who were now trembling like schoolboys, desperate for her attention. You were discussing the Hokage, she said, her voice a soft, melodic purr that sent shivers down their spines. You were plotting to defy him. No. Never, the Earth Daimyo blurted out. A misunderstanding. We were discussing how best to support him. Ida's smile was beautiful and terrifying. Liar. She snapped her fingers. Demon shot forward. He didn't touch the Earth Daimyo. He simply appeared in front of him and stomped his foot. The floor beneath the daimyo's chair exploded upwards, throwing the man into the air. He landed in a heap, gasping and winded. The other 4 daimyo flinched, but they did not call for their guards. The desire to please Eida was stronger than their own self-preservation. Eida glided over to the fallen daimyo and knelt beside him. She placed a delicate hand on his cheek. He shuddered, a tear of pure joy rolling down his face at her touch. You seem to be under a misapprehension, she said, her voice a sweet poison. You think you rule these lands. You think your armies and your titles give you power. You are wrong. She leaned in closer, her lips brushing his ear. There is only one power in this world now. It is the man who holds the planet in his hands. The man who can unmake gods. The man I serve. His name is Naruto Uzumaki. She stood up, her gaze sweeping over the other four, who were frozen in a mixture of terror and adoration. Your armies are a breath in a hurricane. Your titles are dust. From this moment on, you have one purpose, to obey him without question. You will disband your coalition. You will publicly declare your unwavering support for the Hokage. You will give him anything he asks for. If you do not, I will come back. And next time, I will not be so gentle. She turned and walked toward the door, her job done. At the threshold, she paused and looked back at the fire daimyo, who was still staring at her, his mind shattered and remade. And you, she said, her voice losing its sweetness, replaced by a blade of ice. Will send a personal apology to Konoha. On your knees. Then she was gone, leaving behind 5 of the most powerful men in the world, broken, terrified, and utterly, fanatically loyal to a new king. The weight was immense. Naruto sat alone in the dark, in the quiet of his home. The children were with Hinata at the Hyuga compound, shielded from the storm engulfing their father. The house was empty, save for him. The reports had come in. Eida's mission was a success. The feudal lords had capitulated, their joint statement of support for the Hokage sending waves of confusion through the populace. The threat of civil war had been averted, for now. But it was a victory that tasted of ash. He was exhausted. Not physically, his new form seemed to require neither sleep nor sustenance. It was a deeper exhaustion, a weariness of the soul. He had spent his entire life building bridges, forging bonds through trust and empathy. Now, he was ruling through fear and manipulation. He had sent Eida to do something the old Naruto would have found abhorrent. He was using the very powers he despised to hold his world together. He was becoming what he fought against. A tyrant who believed the ends justified the means. He leaned forward, his head in his hands. The crown of the Otsutsuki king was not a physical object, it was a burden of cosmic scale, and it was crushing him. For a fleeting moment, he missed the simplicity of being a genin, where the biggest problem was learning a new jutsu or getting Ichiraku to give him an extra scoop of Narutomaki. A soft footstep on the wooden floor brought his head up. Eida stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the moonlight from the window. She had returned, her mission complete. She said nothing, simply walked over and sat on the floor in front of him. The bravado she had shown in the daimyo's palace was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful concern. She could see the conflict in him, the immense strain he was under. I did what you asked, she said softly. I know, he replied, his voice rough. You were effective. But you hate it, she stated. It wasn't a question. Her Senrigan could see the past, but she didn't need it to read the truth of his heart. You hate what you had me do. What you're becoming. He didn't deny it. This isn't how I wanted to protect them. Maybe, she said, her gaze unwavering, it's the only way that's left. She saw him in a way no one else could. Not as a hero, not as a monster, but as a man trapped between 2 impossible worlds. She saw his exhaustion, his loneliness. And a fierce, protective instinct, purer than any she had felt before, rose in her. She moved closer, kneeling before him. There is another way, she whispered, her voice barely audible. A way to end all this. The strife. The rebellion. The fear. He looked at her, his silver eyes questioning. My power, she said, her own eyes shining with a desperate sincerity. Not the charm. The other side of it. The true name of my ability isn't charm. It's omnipotence. A sliver of Shirbai's power to rewrite reality. I can do more than make people love me. I can edit them. I can rewrite their memories. I can make them loyal, not out of fear or adoration, but because they will genuinely believe it's the right thing to do. I can make the whole world understand. I can make them see you as their savior again. No more fear. No more rebellion. Just peace. Just let me. It was the ultimate temptation. An easy solution. A reset button for the entire world. He could have it all back. The trust, the love, the admiration. He could be their hero again, and all it would cost was their free will. He looked at her, at the genuine, desperate hope in her eyes. She was offering him this gift, this ultimate power, not for her own gain, but to ease his burden. To save him from himself. He reached out and placed a hand on her cheek. His touch was warm. For the first time, it was not the clinical touch of a commander, but the gentle touch of a man. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. Eida, she leaned into his touch, her heart soaring. He understood. He would accept. No. The word was quiet, but it had the force of a tectonic plate shifting. Her eyes widened. But, why? I can fix everything. If I rule over a lie, then I am nothing, he said, his voice thick with a terrible, beautiful resolve. If their loyalty is not earned, if their faith is not freely given, then it's meaningless. It's a puppet show. I would be no better than Amato, or Kaguya, or Araki. I would be just another god, playing with his dolls. He looked into her eyes, and she saw the iron will that had captivated her from the very beginning. The will that made him immune to her power. The will that made him, him. I will not take the easy path, he said, his voice growing stronger. I will not sacrifice their freedom to save my soul. I will bear this weight. I will be the monster they think I am, if that's what it takes to keep them safe. But I will do it honestly. I will rule a world of free people, even if they hate me for it. He chose the hard path. The path of pain and loneliness and sacrifice. He chose it over the perfect, painless lie she offered. And in that moment, Eida's fascination, her awe, her protective instinct, it all coalesced into something new. Something terrifyingly pure. It was love. Not the twisted, desperate need for affection she had always craved, but a profound, reverent love for his strength. For his integrity. For the sheer, unbreakable force of his character. She leaned forward, and her lips met his. It was not a kiss of passion or lust. It was a kiss of reverence. Of an oath. It was the sealing of a bond far deeper than she had ever known. A night princess, finally finding a king worthy of her vow. He did not pull away. He accepted the gesture for what it was, a shared moment of understanding in the heart of the storm. The moment was broken by a piercing siren that suddenly blared through the village. A red light flashed from the Hokage tower, signaling the highest level of emergency. Naruto broke the kiss, his head snapping up, the brief moment of vulnerability gone, replaced by the instant readiness of a warrior. His comms unit crackled to life. It was Shikamaru's voice, tight with panic. Naruto. It's an attack. Not at the borders, inside the village. We have multiple biosignatures appearing out of nowhere. They're monstrous. Naruto was on his feet in an instant, Eida beside him. A new player has entered the game, he said, his voice cold as ice. They raced to the window and looked out. In the center of the village, near the academy, space was twisting. A grotesque, pulsating sphere of flesh and viscera was materializing, and from it, things were beginning to crawl out. They were biological horrors, amalgamations of sinew and bone, their forms shifting and unstable. And at the heart of the attack, Naruto could feel a new Otsutsuki signature. This one was not cold and intellectual like Araki, or arrogant like Vex. It was chaotic, seething with a love for decay and mutation. Suddenly, another calm signal came through, this one weak and staticky. It was Kawaki. Naruto-san, he coughed, his voice strained. Something's wrong with my body. My karma, it's going haywire. Then, the signal cut out. Naruto's eyes narrowed to slits. This new enemy, Xylos, the third member of the Curia, wasn't just attacking the village. He was targeting the very nature of karma itself. And Kawaki had just walked into his trap. Chapter 6, The Celestial Insurrection. Konoha had become a charnel house. The scent of ozone and burning flesh hung heavy in the air, a sickening perfume that clung to the back of the throat. The sky, once a hopeful dawn, was now a bruised, sickly yellow, choked with the smoke of smoldering buildings. The screams of the panicked and the dying were a constant, harrowing symphony. The things that had crawled from Xylos's pulsating biological gateway were abominations. They were not soldiers, they were plagues given legs. Each one was a unique horror, a scuttling mass of limbs and eyes that spat corrosive acid, a lumbering brute of knotted muscle that regenerated from any wound, a shrieking, winged terror that spread a fast-acting paralytic dust. They were the Ten-Tails Fishin clones, monstrous echoes of the divine beast, each one a Kage-level threat in its own right. Naruto stood on the shattered rooftop of the Hokage Tower, a general surveying his collapsing kingdom. The silver halo of his authority was a visible, spinning band of light above his head, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. His senses were a tapestry of horror, feeding him every detail of the slaughter. He could feel the life force of his people being extinguished, one by one. Eida was at his side, her usual bored detachment shattered, replaced by a grim focus. Her Senrigan was his command center, feeding him real-time battlefield data. They're not attacking strategically. They're just, spreading. Like a virus. Their goal is maximum chaos and casualties. It's a feint, Naruto said, his voice a low growl. A butcher's distraction. Their real target is the village's core. He looked toward the academy, where the fighting was thickest. Kawaki. Ida's eyes went distant for a second. He's alive. But, he's struggling. The clone he's fighting, it's different. It's not just attacking him, it's resonating with his karma. It's trying to force an evolution, or a rejection. His body is tearing itself apart. Xylos, Naruto spat the name like a curse. This was the third adjudicator, the biologist, the artist of decay. Where Araki sought to unravel, Xylos sought to corrupt. The village's defenses were crumbling. The shinobi, stripped of their most powerful jutsu by the divine rot, were fighting with kunai, paper bombs, and desperate, suicidal courage. They were dying in droves. We can't fight them on their terms, Naruto said. His mind was a whirlwind of strategic calculation, processing thousands of variables in a single instant. We need to change the equation. He turned to Eida. Find Sasuke. Find Boruto. Now. She didn't need to ask why. Her eyes unfocused, and a moment later, she pointed. Sasuke is on the west wall, holding back a behemoth. Boruto is with Sarada and Mitsuki, evacuating the hospital. Good. Naruto closed his eyes. He reached out, not with his power, but with the remnants of the old bonds, the connections he had forged over a lifetime. He found them, the familiar, defiant chakra of his oldest rival, and the vibrant, conflicted energy of his son. He did not speak to them. He acted. On the western wall, Sasuke Uchiha grunted as his blade scraped uselessly against the thick, chitinous hide of a crab-like monster. His Rinnegan allowed him to see its weak points, but without the full power of a Chidori or the flames of Amaterasu, he lacked the force to pierce them. He was being slowly, inexorably pushed back. Suddenly, a surge of energy, warm and overwhelmingly powerful, flowed into him. It was not chakra. It was something pure, something primordial. It was Naruto's. A sliver of the royal divinity, a fraction of the king's authority, gifted to his most trusted knight. Sasuke's eyes widened. The world sharpened. He felt not just his own power returning, but amplifying to a level he hadn't felt since he possessed the sage's Een seal. His Rinnegan blazed, and a perfect, black Chidori, more potent and stable than any he had ever wielded, crackled to life in his hand. It was not fueled by his depleted chakra, but by the divine gift. Humph, he grunted, a flicker of a smile touching his lips. Showing off again, are you, usurper? He shot forward, a bolt of black lightning, and the Chidori plunged through the monster's hide like it was wet paper. The beast shrieked and convulsed before exploding in a shower of ichor. Across the village, Boruto Uzumaki parried the blow of a multi-limbed clone, his karma seal flaring painfully. He felt weak, his own Otsutsuki power fighting against the divine rot. Then the gift came. The energy slammed into him, and his karma, instead of fighting, was subjugated. The pain vanished, replaced by a feeling of incredible clarity and power. The Jugen in his right eye activated involuntarily, its strange, celestial pattern glowing through his closed eyelid. He saw the Fission clone not as a monster of flesh, but as a construct of flawed, chaotic energy. Whoa, he breathed. He looked at his hand, where a Rasengan was forming. But it wasn't his usual, vanishing Rasengan. This one was a perfect, stable sphere of golden light, humming with a power that felt both familiar and terrifyingly new. It felt like his father's. Everyone, stand back, he yelled to his team. He lunged, driving the golden Rasengan into the clone's chest. The resulting explosion was not chaotic, but controlled, contained, imploding the monster into nothingness. Naruto felt the shift on the battlefield. Two key players, empowered and redeployed. The tide was beginning to turn. But it wasn't enough. This was still just a holding action. Eida, he said, his voice dropping. The clones are a distraction. Xylos is the source. Where is he? Eida's gaze went unfocused, scanning the chaos. He's everywhere. He's not a single person. He's merged with his creation. He's the pulsating gateway, the ground it sits on, the very air around it. He's a living ecosystem of death. Then I'll give him a predator he can't evolve against, Naruto snarled. He looked at Eida, and his expression softened for a fraction of a second. Stay here. Coordinate the defense. Keep them safe. Before she could reply, he was gone. He didn't run or jump. He simply vanished from the rooftop, the air rushing in to fill the space where he had been. He reappeared in the heart of the maelstrom. The academy grounds were a crater of pulsating flesh and writhing tentacles. The air was thick with a biological miasma that would have killed a normal human in seconds. In the center of it all, Kawaki was on his knees, clutching his head, his karma seal fluctuating wildly between its black and red states. A grotesque, vaguely humanoid clone stood over him, its hand on his head, force-feeding him a corrupting energy. A voice, layered and wet, echoed from the very ground itself. It was Xylos. Behold, Heir. The true potential of karma. Not a mere copy, but a forced evolution. A chrysalis of pain from which a beautiful new monstrosity will be born. Naruto ignored the voice. He saw only Kawaki, his adopted son, in agony. And something inside him snapped. The careful control, the kingly restraint, the calculated strategies, all of it burned away in a silent, terrifying inferno of pure rage. He had been trying to be a king. To be a god. But at that moment, he was just a father. And a father protects his family. He stopped holding back his humanity. He let it fuel his divinity. Naruto's voice was unnaturally calm, a quiet sea before a tsunami. Should not have touched my son. He took a breath, and the world held its own. The Baryon mode he had used against Ishiki had been an act of suicidal sacrifice, burning his own life force and Kurama's for a temporary surge of overwhelming power. It was a dying star, brilliant and brief. This was different. He was the star now. The furnace. A torrent of crimson energy erupted from him, not as a cloak, but as a solid, physical aura. It was the color of blood, the color of life and death entwined. It formed 9, flowing tails of pure, condensed energy and a pair of long, rabbit-like ears. The whisker marks on his cheeks thickened, turning into jagged, black brands. This was not Baryon mode. This was the Baryon King state. It was not a sacrifice. It was a declaration. The raw, emotional fury of his human heart was now the fuel for his Otsutsuki engine. It was sustainable. It was controllable. And it was absolute. The power he unleashed was so immense it physically distorted the space around him. The sickly yellow sky above ripped open, revealing the black, star-dusted void of true space. The ground beneath him cracked and buckled. Xylos's voice, for the first time, held a note of fear. Impossible. That form requires a full 10 tails to sustain. You are burning your very soul, I have more than enough to spare, Naruto growled, his voice a guttural echo of man and beast. He moved. The clone standing over Kawaki didn't even have time to register his presence. Naruto was simply there. He didn't punch it. He placed his hand on its head, and the crimson energy of the Baryon King state flowed into it. The clone, a being of chaotic evolution, suddenly found itself subjected to a force of absolute order. Its unstable cells were stabilized. Its chaotic energy was harmonized. Its very existence was resolved. It didn't explode. It just dissolved into a shower of harmless, glowing red particles, like embers from a divine fire. Naruto gently lifted Kawaki, whose body was already beginning to heal under the influence of the crimson aura, and placed him a safe distance away. Then he turned his attention to the pulsating gateway, the heart of Xylos. You cannot kill a concept. I am evolution. I am decay. I am, you are a weed in my garden, Naruto interrupted. He raised a hand, and a truth-seeking orb, no longer black but a blazing, furious crimson, formed above his palm. It expanded, growing larger and larger, until it was a miniature sun of destructive energy. He was not shaping it into a staff or a shield. He was crafting a bomb. A raisin shuriken of soul-annihilating power. No, Xylos shrieked, the entire fleshy landscape convulsing in terror. Tentacles the size of buildings erupted from the ground, lashing out at Naruto. Naruto didn't even look at them. The passive aura of the Baryon King state disintegrated them before they could get within 100 feet of him. He threw the crimson sphere. It did not fly. It teleported, appearing directly in the center of the pulsating gateway. And then, silence. For one eternal second, there was no sound. All the noise of the battle, the screams, the explosions, ceased. Then, a light brighter than the sun erupted from the academy grounds. But there was no heat. No shockwave. It was a silent, crimson detonation that expanded outwards. As the wave of light passed over the remaining Fission clones across the village, they did not scream or explode. They simply ceased to be. They were unwritten from existence, their chaotic code erased by the absolute authority of the Baryon King. The light faded. Where the pulsating, fleshy crater had been, there was now only a smooth, glassy obsidian circle, perfectly flat, as if the world itself had been cauterized. The sickly yellow sky cleared, returning to a crisp, clear blue. The battle was over. The insurrection was crushed. High above the village, invisible to all but the most powerful senses, Araki floated, his serene composure shattered. He had watched the entire exchange, and his brilliant, analytical mind was reeling. He had expected Naruto to be powerful. He had not expected this. This fusion of raw, mortal emotion and divine, cosmic power. It was a combination that should not exist. A paradox that defied all known laws of the Otsutsuki. Vex had tried to trap him in logic and been shattered. Xylos had tried to overwhelm him with chaos and been annihilated. Araki finally, truly understood. Naruto was not just an aberration. He was not just a claimant to the throne. He was a new paradigm. A fundamental threat to the very nature of the Otsutsuki and the gods themselves. The plan to slowly unravel his world was no longer viable. The risk of letting him grow, of letting him master this terrifying new state, was too great. The experiment was over. The harvest must be accelerated, Araki whispered to himself, his face a mask of cold, grim resolve. He descended, not to the village, but to the deep forests outside the land of fire. He found a place where the life energy of the planet was strongest, a nexus of natural power. He bit his thumb and drew a complex seal on the ground with his own blood. He began the chant, a ritual so ancient and forbidden that it had not been performed in millennia. It was a ritual to summon not a seedling of the god tree, but its ultimate expression. The final harvest. The ground began to tremble. A black, viscous sap, oozing a corrupting, all-consuming energy, began to bubble up from the seal. The divine rot was a warning, Araki said, his voice resonating with a power that shook the very bedrock of the continent. This is the sentence. He looked up toward Konoha, a final declaration of war in his twilight eyes. Let us see how you fare, mongrel king, when your precious world is eaten from under your feet. He was summoning the god tree of the void. A creature designed not just to drain a planet of its chakra, but to consume its life force, its history, its very reality, leaving nothing but an empty husk in the void of space. Chapter 7, The Heart of the God Tree. The peace was a fragile, fleeting thing. For a few precious hours after the annihilation of Xylos, a stunned silence had fallen over Konoha. The crimson light had faded, the monsters had vanished, and the survivors had begun to crawl from the wreckage. But the quiet was not one of relief. It was the breathless hush before the other shoe drops. Then the ground began to shake. It was not the familiar tremor of an earthquake. It was a deep, resonant shudder, a groan from the very bones of the planet. From his position in the now ruined Hokage office, Naruto felt it instantly. It was a rhythmic, sickening pulse, like a monstrous heart starting to beat deep within the earth. Eida was beside him, her face pale, her senrigan fixed on a point far to the south. It's a tree, she whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. But it's wrong. It's black. It's growing so fast, and the life energy of the planet, it's being siphoned, drawn into it like water down a drain. Naruto's Baryon King state had receded, leaving him calm and terrifyingly clear. He didn't need Eida's eyes to see what was happening. He could feel it. The vibrant life force of the world, the very energy he had commanded to defeat the Gaki, was being corrupted and consumed. Araki had given up on subtlety. This was a death blow. The god tree of the void, Naruto said, the name a cold weight on his tongue. He had accessed the knowledge during his brief ascension on the lunar throne. It was not a tool for harvesting chakra, it was an instrument of planetary execution. It doesn't just drain energy. It consumes reality. If it reaches maturity, this world, its past, present, and future, will cease to exist. Below them, the village was in a fresh panic. The tremors grew stronger, and on the southern horizon, a line of pure blackness began to rise, blotting out the sky. The tree was already visible, a pillar of darkness ascending to the heavens at an impossible speed. How do we fight that? Shikamaru asked from behind them, his voice ragged. He was coordinating the rescue efforts, but his strategic mind was failing him in the face of such an existential threat. It's not an army. It's a geological event. We don't fight the branches, Naruto said, his silver eyes fixed on the growing darkness. We cut the root. He turned, his gaze locking onto Eida. Araki is at its heart. He is the parasite controlling the host. He is the target. His decision was instantaneous. Sasuke, Boruto, the surviving shinobi, they hold the line here. The tree will send out roots, extensions of its will, to hasten the harvest. Their job is to buy us time. You and I, he said, his focus solely on Eida, are going to the heart of it. Alone. She met his gaze without flinching. This was it. The final gambit. She nodded once, a sharp, determined gesture. What's the plan? Your Senrigan is our only guide through the chaos inside the tree, he explained, his voice low and urgent. It will be a dimension of pure, negative energy, a maze of dying reality. You are my compass. I am your shield. Demon stays here. His ability is useless against Araki, but he can protect the evacuation points. There was no time for goodbyes. No time for grand speeches. Naruto placed a hand on Eida's shoulder. The world around them dissolved, not into a violent rift, but into a silent, streamlined warp. They rematerialized in a nightmare. They were no longer in the land of fire. They were inside the god tree. The air was a thick, viscous soup of black and violet energy that hummed with a malevolent intelligence. The ground was a shifting, fleshy pulp of black wood, and all around them were colossal, pulsating pillars that were the internal structure of the tree itself. Gravity was inconsistent, and the silence was a suffocating pressure. The entire dimension felt like a dying thought. He's this way, Eida grunted, pointing through the swirling chaos. The sheer negative energy of the place was putting a strain on her, even with Naruto's divine protection shielding them. Deeper. At the very center, where the energy is most concentrated. It feels like a throne room. They moved. Naruto took the lead, a phantom in the gloom, his body radiating a soft, golden light that pushed back the encroaching darkness. Eida followed close behind, her mind a map, guiding them through the shifting, labyrinthine corridors of the tree's interior. The structure was actively hostile, the walls trying to close in and crush them, tentacles of black wood lashing out from the floor. Naruto disintegrated them with casual waves of his hand, clearing a path. They reached a vast, central chamber. It was a cathedral of dying wood and corrupt energy. At its center, on a throne carved from the solidified heartwood of the tree, sat Araki. He was no longer the serene scholar. His robes were tattered, and his face was pale and drawn. The tree was feeding on his life force even as he controlled it. This was a mutual act of destruction. He looked up as they entered, his twilight-colored eyes filled with a weary, tragic resolve. You came, he said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. I knew you would. The king, rushing to save his crumbling kingdom. This ends now, Araki, Naruto said, his voice a low growl. The Baryon King's crimson aura began to bleed into his golden one, a sign of his rising anger. Does it? Araki gave a faint, sad smile. You still don't understand the laws of our people, do you, Heir? The true nature of ascension. You think you can have it all. Power and love. The throne and the world. It is a child's fantasy. He raised a hand, and the fleshy walls of the chamber began to writhe. Roots, thick as pythons, shot out from the walls and floor. They didn't target Naruto. They targeted Eida. She cried out as a dozen roots wrapped around her limbs and torso, lifting her into the air, holding her fast. She struggled, but they were impossibly strong, draining her energy. Eida. Naruto roared, starting toward her. Araki cautioned, a flicker of triumph in his tired eyes. I wouldn't do that. This tree is a hungry thing. If you attack it, it will simply consume her. Naruto froze, his body crackling with contained power, a volcano on the verge of eruption. He was caught. This is the final lesson, Mongrel King, Araki said, his voice taking on a professorial tone. The most sacred, and cruelest, law of the Otsutsuki. To achieve true godhood, to unlock the final measure of power, an Otsutsuki must consume the one they hold most dear. They must sacrifice their heart, their love, to fuel their divinity. Kaguya consumed Ishiki. Momoshiki was preparing to consume Kinshiki. It is the way. It is the price of the throne. He looked from the trapped Eida to Naruto, his trap laid bare. I cannot defeat you in your current state, Araki admitted. You are a paradox, a fusion of powers I cannot comprehend. But I can force you to become one of us. To win this fight, to gain the power to destroy this tree and save your world, you must follow the law. You must consume her. Eat the chakra fruit of your beloved. It is the only way. The horror of his words washed over Naruto. He looked at Eida, struggling in the grip of the black roots, her face etched with pain and fear. Araki was forcing him into an impossible choice. Let his world die, or commit the most monstrous act imaginable and become the very thing he despised. Eida heard the words, and a strange, terrible clarity washed over her. She stopped struggling. She looked at Naruto, her eyes filled with a love so pure and absolute it was a physical force. She had spent her life being a tool, a prize, a weapon. To be loved was all she had ever wanted. But to be useful, truly useful to the one person who mattered, that was a higher calling. Do it, she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the humming of the tree. Naruto stared at her, his mind reeling. What? He's right, she said, a sad, beautiful smile on her lips. This is the only way. I'm finally useful to you. My king. Her life had been a lonely, cursed existence. But to die for him, to be the sacrifice that saved his world and allowed him to ascend, it was a worthy end. It was a purpose. It's okay. Do it, Naruto. Win. She offered herself to him. Her life for his victory. Her love as his ultimate weapon. Araki watched, his expression serene. The checkmate was complete. Either Naruto would sacrifice her and become a true, cold Otsutsuki, proving Araki's philosophy correct, or he would refuse and they would all be consumed together. Either way, Araki's principles would be vindicated. Naruto looked at Aida's face, at her tears, at the absolute conviction in her eyes. He saw her sacrifice, her love, her tragic, beautiful offer. He saw the logic of Araki's trap. And a cold, defiant fury, deeper and more profound than any rage he had ever felt, settled in his soul. He began to walk forward, not toward Araki, but toward Eida. The crimson aura of the Baryon King's state flared around him. Araki smiled. The mongrel had chosen power. Naruto reached the bound Eida. He reached up, not with claws and fangs, but with a gentle hand, and cupped her cheek. You are not a tool, he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. You are not a sacrifice. Then he turned his gaze on Araki, and his silver eyes burned with the light of 1,000 dying suns. I told you before, Araki, he growled, his voice a promise of absolute annihilation. I don't follow the laws. He paused, a terrifying, predatory grin spreading across his face. I write them. He did not try to tear Eida from the roots. Instead, he grabbed one of the thick, black tentacles wrapped around her and held it fast. He closed his eyes. He didn't feed on the tree. He fed his own divinity into it. He poured the golden, primordial energy of the progenitor, the crimson fire of the Baryon King, and something else, something uniquely his, the indomitable, stubborn, brilliant orange of the will of fire, directly into the tree's circulatory system. Araki's eyes flew open in shock and horror. What are you doing? The tree was a creature of void, of consumption, of negative energy. Naruto was force-feeding it pure, unadulterated life. He was poisoning the parasite with vitality. It was like pouring molten steel into a vampire's veins. The god tree of the void screamed. It was a sound that transcended dimensions, a shriek of pure, conceptual agony. The entire structure began to shudder violently. The black wood began to crack, not with darkness, but with brilliant, golden light erupting from within. The corrupt energy was being forcefully, violently transmuted. You fool! Araki shrieked, rising from his throne. You will create a paradoxical reaction. You'll destroy us all. The roots holding Eida convulsed and withered, turning to ash. She fell, and Naruto caught her effortlessly, pulling her back from the epicenter of the cataclysm he had just unleashed. The tree was tearing itself apart from the inside out. The negative, consuming energy was warring with the positive, creative force Naruto had injected. It was a fundamental contradiction, a cosmic schism happening at the heart of reality. The throne room began to collapse. Huge chunks of the ceiling, now glowing with a sickly, unstable light, began to fall. Naruto held Eida close, his body a shield against the debris. He looked at Araki, who stood amidst the ruin of his own ultimate weapon, his face a mask of utter disbelief. He had played the game of gods perfectly, and this mortal, this aberration, had just flipped the entire board. The backlash from the tree's self-destruction erupted, a wave of pure, untamed power. It slammed into Araki, throwing him across the chamber. He crashed against the far wall, his body broken, his control over the tree shattered. The tree's death throes were intensifying. The dimension itself was becoming unstable, ready to implode. Naruto looked down at the pale, trembling woman in his arms. Then he looked at the broken form of his enemy. The board was cleared. The pieces were in place. The final duel was about to begin. And the battlefield was the heart of a dying, self-destructing god. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.